There's a moment many adults in America will never admit out loud. A moment when you're sitting alone in your car, engine off, hands trembling on the steering wheel, staring at the house you grew up in, and for the first time in your life, you realize you can't walk through that door anymore. Not because you don't love them, not because you're angry, but because something inside you has finally broken in a way that can't be ignored. Going no contact is one of the most forbidden choices a human being can make. It goes against everything we're taught. Family is forever. You only get one mother. Blood is thicker than water. In American culture, where loyalty to family is treated almost like a moral law, choosing to step away doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a betrayal, a sin, a line you're not supposed to cross. Yet researchers estimate that over 25% of adults in the United States are now estranged from at least one family member. Millions of people who looked at the people who raised them and whispered, "I can't survive inside this relationship anymore." And maybe the real question isn't why they left, but what kind of pain makes such a taboo choice the only path to staying alive. In this video, we're going to uncover the real psychology behind going no contact, the patterns, the wounds, and the truth most families never face. If you've ever questioned your experience, this breakdown will give you clarity, language, and validation you may have never received. Let's begin. Estrangement doesn't happen in a single explosion. It happens in the quiet, in the small moments no one else notices. People often imagine that family breakups are caused by a dramatic fight, a shouting match at Thanksgiving, a disagreement about politics, a forgotten birthday. But in almost every real case, the final straw is never the heaviest one. It's simply the last one placed on a back that has been breaking for years. Family estrangement is a slow burn, a psychological erosion that unfolds over decades. It begins with moments so subtle you barely register them: the dismissive comments, the controlling questions, the emotional minimization disguised as advice. Individually, they seem harmless. Together, they form a landscape of chronic stress. You learn to adapt, you learn to shrink, you learn to ignore the tightening in your chest every time they call your name. This is what psychologists mean by death by 1,000 cuts. It's not the blow that destroys you, it's the repetition. And then one day, something small happens, a joke at your expense, a boundary crossed, a moment of disrespect, so familiar it feels scripted. But this time, something inside you whispers, "I can't do this anymore." Not because the moment was different, but because you are. By the time estrangement appears from the outside, the truth is simple. The relationship has been dying in silence for years. The final moment is just the part people choose to see. In healthy families, there is space, emotional, psychological, and relational space between parent and child. Space to think differently, space to feel differently, space to become a separate human being. But in enmeshed families, that space simply does not exist. Enmeshment is not loud, it's not dramatic. It doesn't look like abuse from the outside. It feels like being loved so tightly that you can no longer breathe. It feels like a parent who says, "I know you better than you know yourself." Or, "If you really loved me, you would do this." It's the collapse of boundaries, the psychological merging of two identities into one. Your emotions become their emotions. Your choices become their business. Your life becomes an extension of theirs. And here's the invisible wound. When you try to separate even in small, harmless ways, it triggers panic or anger in the parent. Choosing a different career feels like betrayal. Setting a boundary feels like disrespect. Having your own private thoughts feels like abandonment. Family systems theorists call this a failure of differentiation, the ability to be connected without being consumed. In enmeshed households, connection comes at the cost of autonomy. Over time, the child learns a devastating truth. I can either stay in this relationship or I can be myself, but I cannot be both. And that realization is often the first quiet step toward estrangement, long before the words "no contact" ever appear. Before anyone goes no contact, there is almost always a long, invisible trail of attempts to fix the relationship. Quiet conversations, carefully written texts, late-night apologies that weren't yours to give. Most adult children don't walk away without trying. They walk away because trying never changes anything. Psychologists call this the reconciliation cycle. Hope conversation, temporary softness, regression hurt again. It usually happens many times, sometimes over decades. You tell them calmly how their comments affect you. For a moment, they seem to understand. They may apologize, or at least act gentler. And then, almost predictably, everything snaps back. The same criticism resurfaces. The same boundary is crossed. The same emotional wounds reopen as if the conversation never happened. Therapy with the parent rarely helps either. Not because therapy is ineffective, but because emotionally immature parents often treat it like a performance. They behave perfectly in the room, then rewrite the session afterward. The therapist agreed with me. You were exaggerating. Eventually, the child reaches a painful clarity. There is no version of the conversation that makes them hear you. No tone soft enough. No script careful enough. No amount of love strong enough to make them change. And when reconciliation fails again and again, distance begins to look less like abandonment and more like survival. If leaving a toxic parent were simply a matter of logic, most estrangements would happen in childhood. But they don't. They often happen in someone's 30s, 40s, even 50s, because the bond between a child and an unhealthy parent is not rational. It's biological. It's survival. Trauma bonding forms when love and fear come from the same person, when comfort and pain arrive in the same voice, when the parent who hurts you is also the parent you must cling to in order to feel safe. This creates a powerful neurological loop. Moments of kindness trigger dopamine. Moments of fear trigger cortisol. And your nervous system becomes addicted to the cycle. Not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. To survive inside this emotional storm, many children develop what psychologists call a false self, a version of themselves designed to keep the peace. The quiet child, the agreeable one, the fixer, the caretaker, the therapist of the house. Some children become parentified, carrying adult responsibilities long before their brains or hearts are ready. They become the problem solver, the emotional sponge, the one who absorbs the chaos so everyone else can function. And when a child grows up being praised only for who they are in service to the parent, their real identity begins to disappear. But adulthood has a way of exposing the truth. A stable relationship, a new baby, a therapist's question, a single moment of exhaustion, and suddenly the false self begins to crack. You catch yourself wondering, who am I when I'm not trying to keep them calm? Why do I feel so unsafe around the people who say they love me? Leaving takes decades, not because the pain isn't clear, but because the attachment runs deeper than the wound. And breaking that bond feels like tearing out a part of your own history, your own identity, your own childhood. Yet for many, it's the only way to finally breathe. For most people, setting a boundary is simple. You say, "Please don't speak to me that way," and the other person adjusts. But in toxic or emotionally immature families, a boundary isn't heard as a request. It's heard as an attack. This is where narcissistic injury comes in, the deep, sudden wound a parent feels when their child implies they are anything less than perfect. A healthy parent can reflect. A wounded parent cannot. They don't hear what you said. They hear what their ego interprets. You're a bad mother. You failed as a father. You're the problem. And because that interpretation feels unbearable, they respond with a predictable defensive pattern known as DARVO. Deny. I never did that. Attack. You're too sensitive. You twist everything. Reverse victim and offender. After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me? At that moment, communication becomes impossible. You are trying to solve a relationship issue. They are trying to protect a fragile self-image. You're speaking from reality. They're speaking from injury. A simple, healthy boundary like, "Please stop yelling at me," becomes a battlefield. A moment meant to create safety turns into a war you never intended to fight. Over time, the child learns an exhausting truth. There is no amount of calm conversation, no tone gentle enough, no script perfect enough to make a wounded parent hear a boundary as anything but betrayal. And this is often where the first thoughts of estrangement begin. If you spend any time in estranged parent forums, you'll see the same sentence repeated over and over again. "I have no idea why my child cut me off." But when you talk to the adult children, their stories sound nothing alike. "I wrote them a 10-page letter. We sat down for hours. We went to therapy for a year. So why do so many parents insist they were given no reason?" Psychologists call this phenomenon the missing reasons. Not because the reasons were never given, but because the parent's mind refuses to hold them. When an adult child says, "You hurt me," the words don't enter a neutral space. They collide with the parent's identity. "I am a good mother. I am a loving father." Anything that threatens that identity creates unbearable cognitive dissonance. To resolve that discomfort, the brain performs a kind of emotional erasure, not a conscious lie, a subconscious rewriting. There are 3 common forms of this erasure. 1. Distortion, twisting the story until it no longer resembles the truth. 2. Minimization. It wasn't that bad. You're overreacting. 3. Projection. Your partner turned you against me. The parent remembers the tone, not the content. They remember the tears, but not their cause. They remember the confrontation, but not the years of pain that led to it. And when the child finally chooses distance, the parent's mind closes the final loop. They left for no reason. It becomes the last invalidation, the final proof that reconciliation is impossible. Before anyone goes no contact, they almost always pass through something far more subtle, an emotional prison made of fear, obligation, and guilt. Psychologists call it fog, and it explains why so many adults stay in toxic family systems decades longer than they want to. Fear is the first chain. Not fear of violence, though, that happens too, but fear of emotional retaliation, fear of being shamed, fear of being punished with silence, anger, or humiliation. In many households, love is conditional and approval is weaponized. You learn early that stepping out of line means losing safety. Then comes obligation, the belief that you owe your parents your loyalty simply because they raised you. In American culture, this obligation is treated almost like a moral debt. After everything I sacrificed for you, it doesn't matter how unhealthy the dynamic is. You are expected to stay, to serve, to comply. But the heaviest chain is guilt. Because guilt doesn't just control your actions, it controls your identity. It whispers, "You're selfish, you're ungrateful, good children don't walk away." And when a parent uses guilt as a tool, the child stops trusting their own emotional reality. FOG keeps people trapped long after the relationship has become harmful. It convinces you that leaving makes you a monster, and staying makes you good. But the truth is simpler and harder. FOG is not love. It's control made invisible, and recognizing it is often the moment the prison door begins to crack open. When someone goes no contact, outsiders imagine freedom, a clean break, a dramatic escape, a fresh start. But the truth is far quieter and far heavier. The aftermath often begins with a grief that has no name. Not the grief of death. There is no funeral, no rituals, no casseroles dropped at your door. This is ambiguous loss, a kind of mourning where the person is still alive, yet the relationship is not. You grieve two losses at once: the parent you had and the parent you needed but never received. This grief is complicated because it carries guilt, relief, sadness, and clarity all at the same time. One moment you feel liberated, the next you feel like the worst child in the world. Healing begins with accepting that both can coexist. But something else happens, something most people don't expect. Your body begins to change. For many survivors of toxic family systems, the nervous system has lived in subtle fight or flight for years. And when the source of stress is removed, the body reacts before the mind does. Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens. You sleep more deeply than you have in a decade. Your stomach aches disappear. Your chest loosens. This is somatic relief, the nervous system finally exhaling after a lifetime of bracing. And in that space, something new begins. Reparenting the self. Reparenting isn't about blaming your parents. It's about learning to give yourself what was missing. Validation without conditions, boundaries without punishment, love without fear. It looks like saying, "I'm allowed to feel this," practicing self-kindness in moments of self-criticism, choosing rest without guilt, surrounding yourself with people who don't require you to disappear to be loved. Eventually, you start to rebuild an identity not shaped by fear or obligation, but by choice. You discover your preferences, your voice, your emotional palette, pieces of yourself that were buried under survival mode. The paradox is this: estrangement breaks your heart before it sets you free. But the freedom, once it arrives, is real. It becomes the soil where a new, healthier version of you can finally grow. The truth about estrangement is this: you don't walk away to punish anyone. You walk away because your spirit can't survive inside a relationship that refuses to change. No contact isn't the absence of love. It's the refusal to keep sacrificing yourself in the name of it. It's choosing truth over denial, peace over chaos, a future over a wound. And yet, many who take this step carry a haunting fear. Does this make me the villain? But choosing yourself is not cruelty. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. Healing is not ingratitude. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop abandoning themselves for the sake of preserving a story that was never true. So if you're on this journey or quietly considering it, remember this: you are not alone. You are not heartless. You are someone who finally decided that your life deserves safety, dignity, and something softer than survival. There is a beautiful life on the other side of guilt, a life where you are allowed to exist without fear. If this video helped you feel seen, I hope you'll stay. Subscribe for more deep psychology breakdowns, healing conversations, and the truths we aren't taught to talk about. And if you feel safe, share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need your voice to feel a little less alone. Thank you for watching.